I always thought New York City was loud, but lately, the silence in our one-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side was deafening. It wasn't the quiet of peace, it was the quiet of something unspoken, an invisible chasm widening between me and Alex. At first, I chalked it up to his long hours at Amiscon, debugging code and troubleshooting client-server crashes. He'd come home late, his shoulders hunched with exhaustion, murmuring something about deadlines as he headed straight for the shower. I was used to the rhythm of our lives being out of sync. Working retail at Calvin Klein wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and I loved the fast-paced days of folding tailored trousers and setting up immaculate displays. But lately, even the mundane moments felt brittle, like a puzzle piece forced to fit where it didn't belong. It all came to a head that Friday night. Alex had left for work earlier than usual, saying he had a team lunch with some new hires. I didn't think much of it until I walked into the apartment after my shift and froze. There was a scent, something unfamiliar and sweet. Not my lavender air freshener, but floral, musky, and cloying. My heart started pounding as I took a cautious step forward. The hallway mirror reflected a small detail I couldn't ignore, a red lipstick stain on the rim of the glass Alex had left on the kitchen counter. I don't wear lipstick. Not red, anyway. It was ridiculous, I told myself, to jump to conclusions over a glass. But then I noticed something else, the faintest indentation on the couch cushions, like someone had just been sitting there. My throat tightened. I wasn't imagining things. Someone had been here. The weight of suspicion settled in my chest, heavy and inescapable. Still, I needed proof. I began to retrace my steps, paying attention to things I'd normally overlook. The disheveled throw blanket on the armrest, a faint trace of perfume on the edge of the love seat. And then I spotted it, a delicate earring, gold, with a small pearl dangling from its hook, glinting under the soft glow of our floor lamp. My stomach twisted into knots. I couldn't confront Alex without more. So, I did what I thought was best, I waited. The hours dragged on, my anxiety amplifying with every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside our window. By the time the doorknob turned at 11:47 p.m., my thoughts were a tangle of anger, confusion, and dread. "Hey," Alex called, kicking off his shoes and dropping his bag near the door. He looked at me, startled to find me sitting on the couch, arms crossed. "You're up?" "Couldn't sleep," I said, my voice flat. His brows furrowed. "Long day?" I didn't answer. Instead, I held up the earring. "You forgot to tell me we had company today." His eyes darted to the pearl dangling from my hand, and for a fleeting second, I saw it, the flash of panic. But he recovered quickly, his lips curling into a nervous smile. "That's not mine." "No kidding," I shot back. "So whose is it?" Alex hesitated, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. "It's probably one of your friends," he said weakly. "Maybe from last week?" The lie was so thin it made my chest ache. "I haven't had anyone over in weeks," I said quietly, standing up. "Do you think I'm stupid, Alex?" "No, of course not," he said, stepping toward me, hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "I don't know how it got there. Maybe it's been here for a while." "A while?" My voice rose, each word slicing through the fragile air between us. "So you're saying this earring just magically appeared on our couch? Why are you acting like this?" His tone sharpened, defensiveness creeping into his voice. "You're blowing this way out of proportion." I felt a hot flush of anger rise to my cheeks. "Don't gaslight me, Alex. I'm not an idiot. Someone was here. And whoever she was, she left this behind." "I don't know what you want me to say," he snapped, running a hand through his hair. "You're making something out of nothing." I stared at him, searching his face for any sign of remorse, of the man I thought I knew. But all I saw was a stranger. "Then why does the apartment smell like perfume?" I asked, my voice trembling. "And why was the couch warm when I got home?" His mouth opened, then closed. He was cornered, and he knew it. I don't, he began, but I cut him off. Just tell me the truth, I said, my voice breaking. Please, Alex. For a moment, he looked like he might. His shoulders sagged, and his eyes darted to the floor. But then he straightened, his jaw tightening. There's nothing to tell, he said coldly. I felt something inside me shatter. I don't believe you. With that, I turned and walked into the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. The earring stayed on the coffee table that night, gleaming like a silent witness to the cracks in our marriage. I woke up the next morning to the sound of Alex moving around the apartment. The clink of coffee mugs in the kitchen, the soft shuffle of his slippers. It was a familiar noise, yet it felt foreign now, like a melody played out of tune. I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying last night in my mind. Every word, every pause, every flicker of guilt that crossed his face. By the time I emerged, Alex was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop, tapping away like it was any other Saturday. The earring was still on the coffee table, untouched. He didn't look up when I walked in. Morning, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Morning. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the tension between us so thick it was suffocating. We went about the morning in strained silence, each movement feeling choreographed. The clatter of dishes, the hum of the radiator, the occasional murmur of a passing car outside. But I couldn't keep up the charade for long. I'm going out, I said abruptly, grabbing my coat. Where? He asked, his fingers pausing over the keyboard. Just out, I replied, not looking at him. He didn't press further. I left the apartment and wandered the streets, my mind racing. The city bustled around me, the chatter of tourists and honking taxis a stark contrast to the storm inside my head. I needed answers. And I needed a plan. By the time I reached the Calvin Klein store, I was out of breath but resolute. My manager, Vanessa, had just finished arranging a window display when she spotted me. You're not on the schedule today, she said, surprised. Everything okay? Vanessa, can we talk? I asked, glancing around. The store was quiet, save for a few customers browsing racks of winter coats. She nodded, concern flickering across her face. We stepped into the break room, and I closed the door behind us. I need to ask you something, I said, my voice low. It's about Alex. Vanessa froze, her eyes narrowing slightly. What about him? Do you know anything? I asked, feeling ridiculous but desperate. Has he said anything to you? Or? I don't know. Have you noticed anything weird? Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she hesitated. For just a second, I thought I saw something, an emotion flicker across her face that she quickly buried. Why would I know anything about Alex? She asked, her tone guarded. I don't know. I burst out, running a hand through my hair. It's just, things have been off between us. And last night I found an earring in our apartment. Someone else's. He's acting so strange, Vanessa. Her gaze darted to the floor, and I knew, she knew something. You're not telling me everything, I said, my voice trembling. Look, she said, folding her arms. It's not my place to get involved in your marriage. Vanessa, I pleaded. Please. There was a long pause. Then, finally, she sighed and met my gaze. I don't know for sure, okay? But Alex has been friendly. Too friendly. With someone. My heart dropped. Who? She hesitated. I'm not sure, but I've seen him talking to someone at work. A woman. He always looks nervous when I pass by. Who is she? I pressed, my hands gripping the edge of the table. Her name's Becca, she said reluctantly. I think she works in HR. Becca. The name was like a needle to the heart. I didn't know her, but now I hated her. That evening, I returned home, determined to confront Alex again. I rehearsed the words in my head on the subway ride back, my anger bubbling just beneath the surface. But when I walked into the apartment, I found it empty. Alex's laptop was gone, his coat missing from the rack. A note sat on the kitchen counter, scrawled in his hurried handwriting, "Working late. Don't wait up." I crumpled the note in my hand, anger and despair churning inside me. The excuses, the evasions, the lies, it all pointed to one thing. He was cheating. I didn't need him to admit it, I felt it in my bones. But why in our home? Why here? That part gnawed at me, a betrayal that went beyond physical infidelity. This was the space we had built together. Our sanctuary. I couldn't sit still. My mind replayed Vanessa's words, conjuring an image of Alex and Becca in some corner of his office, whispering, laughing, touching. The thought made my stomach turn. I needed to confirm it. Taking a deep breath, I reached for Alex's tablet, the one he always left in the living room. It was synced to his work emails and calendar, a detail I remembered from a conversation months ago when he'd asked for my help setting it up. He wasn't careful with his passwords, it took me 3 tries before I was in. My hands trembled as I scrolled through his emails. Most were innocuous, meeting requests, project updates, team-wide announcements. But then I found it. An email from Becca W., sent late one night last week. The subject line was innocuous, follow-up. But the message inside was anything but. "Hey Alex. Just thinking about the other night. I can't stop smiling. Let's do it again soon. Maybe somewhere less risky." My vision blurred as I read the words over and over, the bile rising in my throat. Less risky? What did that mean? How far had they gone? I dropped the tablet on the couch and backed away, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. And then I saw it, the corner of a scarf sticking out from the laundry basket in the hallway. A scarf that wasn't mine. I pulled it out, the soft fabric slipping through my fingers. It was pale pink, delicate, and smelled faintly of the same floral perfume I'd noticed the night before. The room seemed to tilt. My legs gave way, and I sank to the floor, clutching the scarf to my chest. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was proof. The scarf stayed in my lap as I sat on the floor, trying to piece together the shattered fragments of my life. Proof lay in my hands, and yet it felt like the floor had given out beneath me. How long had it been going on? Was it just her, or had there been others? And why here, in our home? I wanted answers, but more than that, I wanted him to feel the weight of what he had done. Every ounce of trust, every shared moment, every promise we had made to each other, he had burned it all. My chest heaved with a mix of anger and anguish. But I wasn't going to crumble. Not yet. I stood and grabbed the scarf, determined to confront him. The tablet was still unlocked, and my fingers hovered over the screen. There were too many messages between him and Becca to ignore. Some were professional, but others were casual, too casual. One, dated 2 weeks ago, read, "I'm craving those dumplings again. Should we plan a meeting?" Another, with a winking emoji, asked if he'd be staying late again. The timestamps were damning, some sent at 10 p.m., others well past midnight. I scrolled through the messages like a detective piecing together a crime, the pit in my stomach growing heavier with every word. Then I stumbled across something else, a calendar invite. Meeting with Vanessa, it read, scheduled for the following Thursday. My blood ran cold. Vanessa. My manager. My confidant. No. That couldn't be possible. I clicked the invite, opening the details, and sure enough, there was a note attached. "Let's discuss next steps at your place after work." The scarf slipped from my hands. By the time Alex came home that night, I was ready. I'd placed the earring, the scarf, and the printed emails on the kitchen counter, lined up like damning evidence in a trial. I sat at the table, waiting, my heart pounding but my face set like stone. When the door opened, his smile faltered the moment he saw me. "Hey," he said cautiously, his eyes darting to the counter. "What's all this?" I didn't answer at first, letting the silence stretch, letting him feel its weight. Finally, I said, "Sit down." He hesitated. "What's going on?" "Sit down." My voice was steady, though I was trembling inside. Alex obeyed, sinking into the chair across from me. He looked uneasy, his usual calm facade cracking around the edges. "Who is she?" I asked, pointing to the earring. "What?" Don't play dumb, Alex," I said sharply. "Who is she?" He stared at me, the color draining from his face. I don't know what you're talking about." "You really want to go that route?" I said, holding up the scarf. "What about this? Or the emails? Should I start reading them out loud?" He froze, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I pressed on. "Let me make it easier for you," I said, my voice cold. "Becca. Vanessa. How long has it been going on?" "Weeks? Months? Vanessa?" He blinked, genuinely startled, before shaking his head. "No. It's not, she's not." "Then who, Alex?" I demanded, leaning forward. "Because someone has been in this apartment. Someone who left these behind. Someone who wears perfume that smells like a florist exploded." He buried his face in his hands. It's Becca," he muttered, his voice barely audible. The confirmation hit me like a punch to the gut. Even though I'd known, hearing him admit it still shattered something inside me. "How long?" I asked, my voice hollow. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. "A few months." "Months," I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. "And here? In our home?" He flinched, shame flickering across his face. I'm sorry." "Sorry?" I said, my voice rising. "You're sorry? You bring another woman into our home, you lie to my face, you make me question everything I thought I knew about us, and all you can say is you're sorry?" "I made a mistake," he said weakly, his gaze dropping to the table. "A mistake?" I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. This is a choice." Repeated choices. Alex didn't argue. He just sat there, his shoulders slumped, looking like a man who'd lost a war. "What else?" I demanded, pacing now. "Tell me everything. How did it start? How many times? How many lies?" "It didn't mean anything," he said, his voice breaking. I was stressed, and she was there. She listened. It wasn't supposed to happen, but it did, and I didn't know how to stop. "Didn't know how to stop," I echoed bitterly. "You knew how to start, though." The room fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain he had inflicted on me. But instead, I just stood there, staring at him, tears burning my eyes. "What do you want from me?" Alex finally asked, his voice small. "I want the truth," I said. "Every last bit of it." For the next hour, he told me everything. How it had started as late-night conversations at work, confiding in each other about deadlines and stress. How one conversation led to another, then to drinks, then to stolen kisses in the elevator. How he'd invited her over one night when I was closing late at the store, telling himself it would be a one-time mistake. It wasn't. By the time he finished, I felt hollow. Like every part of me had been scooped out and replaced with numbness. "I love you," he said, his voice cracking. "I know I don't deserve you, but I love you." I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You don't love me, Alex. You love yourself. You love what's easy, what's convenient. And when things got hard, you threw us away." His face crumpled, but I didn't care. He'd had his chance to choose me, and he hadn't. "I need some time," I said finally. "To think." To figure out what's next. He nodded, his eyes filled with regret. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. But as I walked away, shutting the bedroom door behind me, I knew there were some things that couldn't be fixed. The days that followed were a blur. Alex and I moved around the apartment like strangers, barely speaking except for the occasional logistical question about groceries or bills. He was trying, offering to cook, cleaning up after himself, even leaving sticky notes on the fridge with phrases like, "thinking of you," or, "can we talk?" But I wasn't ready. I couldn't look at him without seeing Becca. Without seeing the betrayal. At work, I confided in Vanessa again. She'd apologized profusely for not telling me sooner, swearing she hadn't known the extent of Alex's behavior. I wanted to believe her, but my trust was fragile. Still, she offered support, and I accepted it because I had no one else to lean on in the city. "I think you need to take control of the situation," she said one afternoon as we folded denim. "Don't let him dictate how this ends. You need to do what's best for you." Her words stuck with me. That evening, I sat in the living room, staring at the blank pages of a notebook. I needed clarity. A plan. Something to get me through the storm. My first instinct had been to leave, to pack my things and go, but the thought of walking away from the home I'd built, the life I'd worked so hard for, felt like letting him win. No. If anyone was going to leave, it was him. The opportunity presented itself a week later when Alex came home, visibly drained, and announced, "I'm going to start working from the office again." I looked up from the magazine I was pretending to read. "Why?" "I just think we need some space," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "And I need to focus." The irony of him saying we need space wasn't lost on me. But I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "That's probably a good idea." That night, I waited until he was asleep and crept into the living room to retrieve his laptop. My hands shook as I opened it, but this time, I wasn't searching for evidence. I had enough of that. Instead, I was looking for a way to secure my footing. Alex wasn't cautious with his personal information. His emails, calendar, and even his cloud storage were accessible without much effort. Within minutes, I had everything I needed: financial records, passwords, and, most importantly, proof of his affair with Becca. Screenshots of emails, calendar invites, and even a folder labeled Becca Stuff. The next day, I went to a lawyer. Her office was small, tucked away in an unassuming building in Midtown, but the moment I walked in, I felt a flicker of hope. "Adriana Vasquez," she said, extending her hand. "What can I do for you?" I explained everything: the affair, the emails, the earring, the scarf. She listened intently, jotting down notes and occasionally nodding. "You're in a strong position," she said when I finished. "The apartment is in both your names, correct?" "Yes," I said. "But I pay the bulk of the rent. His contribution is minimal." "That works in your favor," she said. "We can push for a buyout agreement or request that he vacates the premises while you sort out your next steps." I left her office feeling lighter. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. I had power again, something I hadn't felt in weeks. That weekend, I put my plan into motion. "Alex," I said one morning as we sat at the kitchen table, the tension between us palpable. "We need to talk." His eyes flicked up from his coffee. "Okay." I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "This isn't working. I think it's best if you move out." He blinked, the words clearly catching him off guard. "Move out? Where am I supposed to go?" "I don't know, Alex," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "That's for you to figure out. But I can't keep living like this. I need space. Real space." He opened his mouth to argue, but then closed it, nodding slowly. "I guess I deserve that." "Yes, you do," I said, surprised by my own bluntness. Over the next few days, he started packing his things. I didn't help, and he didn't ask me to. Each box he carried out of the apartment felt like a small victory, a weight lifting from my chest. By the following Saturday, he was gone, leaving behind only the bare essentials and a set of keys on the counter. I thought I'd feel relief the moment the door closed behind him, but instead, I felt an ache. This was the man I had loved, the man I thought I'd spend my life with. And now, he was just gone. A week later, I was walking home from work when I saw her. Becca. She was waiting outside a coffee shop a block from my apartment, scrolling on her phone. Her dark hair was pulled into a sleek ponytail, and she wore a bright red coat, the kind that demanded attention. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding. I wanted to confront her, to ask her why. Why she thought it was okay to ruin my life. But as I stood there, watching her laugh at something on her screen, I realized something: she wasn't worth it. She wasn't the one who had broken my trust, who had lied to my face, who had taken vows and then thrown them away. That was Alex. So I turned and walked away, leaving her behind. The apartment was eerily quiet now that Alex was gone. I should have felt liberated, but the silence was deafening. Every room felt like a monument to what we'd lost. The couch where we'd binge-watched our favorite shows, the kitchen where he'd taught me how to make his grandmother's lasagna, every corner was steeped in memories, each one more painful than the last. I had to fill the space with something else. Something mine. The first thing I did was rearrange the furniture. It seemed trivial, but moving the couch to face the opposite wall and swapping the bedroom lamps made the space feel different. New. I took down the framed photos of us and replaced them with abstract art I'd found at a thrift store. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Vanessa came over that Friday night, bearing a bottle of red wine and a bag of takeout. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass as we sat on the floor amidst the mess of my redecorating efforts. "To new beginnings," I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. She told me about her new plans for the store's spring line, and I told her about my lawyer's advice. For the first time in weeks, I laughed, really laughed. It felt good to have someone in my corner. "You're stronger than you think," Vanessa said as she left that night, hugging me tightly. "Don't forget that." Her words stayed with me. 2 weeks passed. Alex texted occasionally, asking how I was or if I needed anything, but I rarely responded. There was nothing left to say. I focused on work, throwing myself into long shifts and late nights. It wasn't a perfect distraction, but it kept my mind from spiraling. The days blurred together, each one slightly less painful than the last. And then, one afternoon, everything changed. I was restocking a rack of jackets when a customer approached me, a tall woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor. She introduced herself as Karen, a recruiter for a high-end boutique in Soho. "I've been watching you," she said, her tone crisp but kind. "You're efficient, professional, and you have an eye for detail. Ever thought about moving up in the retail world?" The question caught me off guard. "I haven't, actually." "Well, you should," she said, handing me a business card. "Call me if you're interested. We could use someone like you." I stared at the card long after she left, her words replaying in my head. Maybe this was the universe giving me a sign, a push to move forward. That evening, I called Karen. By the end of the week, I had an interview scheduled. I didn't tell Alex. It wasn't his business anymore. But I did confide in Adriana, my lawyer, when we met to finalize the next steps of our separation. "You're rebuilding," she said with a smile. "That's good. It'll help." Rebuilding was a generous term for what I was doing, but it was better than nothing. The interview went well, and 2 weeks later, I was offered the job. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental, a new chapter that didn't involve Alex. Of course, life had other plans. One Friday evening, as I was leaving the boutique after a long day of training, I spotted Alex waiting outside. He looked different, thinner, more disheveled. "Hey," he said, stepping toward me hesitantly. I froze, clutching my bag tighter. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," he said, his voice low. "Can we talk?" "There's nothing to talk about," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "You made your choices, Alex." "I know," he said, running a hand through his hair. I've been thinking. About everything. And No, I interrupted, holding up a hand. "You don't get to come here and act like you're sorry now. You don't get to show up when I'm finally starting to move on." "I am sorry," he insisted, his eyes pleading. "I messed up, and I hate myself for it." "Good," I snapped, my anger boiling over. "You should. But that doesn't change what you did." He looked like he wanted to say more, but I didn't give him the chance. I turned and walked away, my heels clicking against the pavement. I didn't look back. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the skyline. The confrontation had left me shaken, but it also felt like closure. Alex was part of my past now, and that was where he would stay. I didn't need him. I didn't need anyone. For the first time in months, I felt free. The confrontation with Alex outside the boutique lingered in my mind for days. I replayed his words, his pleading expression, the way his shoulders sagged when I walked away. A small part of me wanted to feel pity for him, but I couldn't. Not after everything. I threw myself even harder into my new job, learning the ins and outs of the boutique's luxury clientele and brand philosophy. Karen turned out to be a tough but supportive mentor, pushing me to think bigger, to see myself as more than just a cog in the retail machine. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building something for myself, something real, something lasting. But even as I moved forward, reminders of Alex kept finding their way back to me. It was a chilly Saturday morning when I decided to clean out the closet Alex had left half empty after moving out. I'd been avoiding it, unwilling to face the lingering pieces of him still tucked away in the shadows. But now, with the apartment feeling more like mine every day, I knew it was time. I pulled out the boxes and bags he'd left behind, sorting through them with a detached efficiency. Old t-shirts, outdated tech gadgets, a crumpled pile of papers that looked like forgotten work files. And then I found it, a small, worn notebook tucked beneath a pile of receipts. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened it, expecting to find more work notes or meaningless scribbles. But instead, I found pages filled with Alex's handwriting, messy, hurried, and raw. The first entry stopped me cold. "I don't know what's wrong with me. I love her. I do. But sometimes, it feels like I'm suffocating." My breath caught as I read the words. I flipped to another page. "Becca makes me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. But I hate myself for it. I hate what I'm doing to her, to us." The entries painted a picture I hadn't expected, one of guilt, confusion, and self-loathing. It didn't excuse his actions, but it gave me a glimpse into his mind during those months when everything had unraveled. At the bottom of one page, he had scrawled a question that felt like a dagger to my chest: am I a terrible person? Or just a weak one? I closed the notebook and set it aside, my emotions a chaotic swirl of anger, sadness, and a strange, reluctant understanding. Alex had made his choices that hurt me deeply, but he wasn't the heartless monster I'd built him up to be in my head. He was human. Flawed. Weak. And lost. But his weakness didn't justify his betrayal. And it didn't change what I needed to do: keep moving forward. That evening, I called Adriana to let her know I was ready to proceed with the separation agreement. "You've come a long way," she said, her voice warm. "I'm proud of you." "Thanks," I said, exhaling deeply. "It's time. I'm ready." The paperwork was finalized within a week. Alex didn't contest anything, and I suspected he knew better than to push back. When the documents arrived in the mail, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with sadness. This was it. The end of the chapter. But endings were also beginnings. A few days later, I decided to treat myself to a day out. I wandered through Central Park, the bare branches above me swaying in the crisp winter wind. The city buzzed around me, alive with its usual energy, but for the first time in months, I didn't feel overwhelmed by it. I felt grounded. Present. As I sat on a bench, sipping a coffee and watching children chase each other across the grass, I realized something: I was okay. Maybe not completely healed, but okay. And that was enough. That night, Vanessa came over again, this time with a celebratory bottle of champagne. To officially closing the door on that chapter, she said, raising her glass. To new beginnings, I replied, clinking mine against hers. As we laughed and talked, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, the sharp edges of my pain began to dull. My new job at the boutique felt like a lifeline, giving me purpose and keeping me too busy to dwell on the past. The city that once seemed so cold and unrelenting now felt alive again, its rhythm steadying me, its energy pulling me forward. I started to carve out routines for myself. Saturday mornings became sacred, reserved for long walks through the park or browsing small markets downtown. I signed up for a pottery class after Karen's suggestion, and though my first few pieces were laughably misshapen, I loved the quiet focus it demanded. And then there were the little victories, like finally tackling that stack of unread books on my nightstand or rewatching old movies without breaking down during the love scenes. It was as if I was learning how to be me again, piece by piece. But healing wasn't linear. There were still bad days, moments when memories of Alex would creep in uninvited. Sometimes I'd catch myself wondering where he was or if he ever thought of me. And on the worst nights, I'd replay every argument, every betrayal, searching for answers I knew I'd never get. Still, I kept moving. It was on one of those Saturday walks that I met someone new. I was wandering through an artisan market near Union Square when I stopped at a stall selling hand-painted ceramics. The pieces were stunning, vibrant colors swirled together in mesmerizing patterns. I reached for a small blue vase just as someone else did, our hands brushing. "Sorry," I said, pulling back quickly. "No, you go ahead," the man said with a smile. He was tall, with dark hair and kind eyes, his demeanor warm and approachable. "You sure?" I asked, holding the vase awkwardly. "Absolutely. I was just admiring it, but it's yours if you want it." I hesitated, feeling a little flustered. "It's beautiful. But now I feel bad taking it." He laughed softly, and the sound was like a balm. "I insist. Besides, I can always admire it from afar if I see you carrying it around." I smiled despite myself, the interaction catching me off guard. "Thanks. I paused, debating whether to introduce myself. "Elliot," he offered, extending a hand. "Anna," I said, shaking it. His grip was firm but gentle, his smile disarming. "Well, Anna, it's nice to meet you," he said. "Enjoy your vase." As he turned to leave, I felt an unexpected pang of regret. "Wait," I blurted out. He stopped, looking back at me curiously. "Would you like to grab a coffee?" "My treat." "As a thank you." His smile widened. "I'd love to." Elliot was different. Over coffee, we talked about everything and nothing: his work as a freelance graphic designer, my new role at the boutique, our favorite spots in the city. He was easy to talk to, his presence comforting in a way I hadn't realized I needed. When we parted ways that afternoon, he gave me his number and said, "No pressure, but I'd love to see you again." I tucked the number into my coat pocket, unsure of what I wanted but grateful for the possibility. That evening, as I sat in my apartment staring at the vase, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me was excited at the idea of something new, of letting myself feel hope again. But another part of me was terrified. What if I wasn't ready? What if I was too broken to let anyone in? I thought about Alex, about the pain he had caused, and for the first time, I realized that I didn't hate him anymore. I wasn't sure if I forgave him, maybe I never would, but the anger I'd clung to for so long was fading. It was freeing, in a way, to let go of the bitterness and just breathe. I picked up my phone and stared at Elliot's number for a long time before finally typing out a message. "Hi, it's Anna. Thanks for the coffee earlier. I'd love to do it again sometime." His reply came almost instantly. "Me too. Just say when." Over the next few weeks, Elliot and I started to meet regularly. It began casually, coffee here, a walk there, but slowly, our conversations deepened. He had a calmness about him that put me at ease, and his attention felt genuine, unhurried. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to guard my every word or brace myself for disappointment. But I was cautious. Every step forward felt like walking on thin ice, the memory of Alex and his betrayal lurking just beneath the surface. Elliot seemed to sense this and never pushed. He let me set the pace, and for that, I was grateful. One night, after a long day at work, we met for dinner at a small Italian restaurant near his apartment in Greenwich Village. The place was charming, dimly lit, with mismatched chairs and red-checked tablecloths. It was cozy and unpretentious, the kind of place that felt like a secret only locals knew about. "So," he said as he poured us both glasses of wine, "what's something you've always wanted to do but never have?" The question caught me off guard. "I don't know," I said, swirling my glass. "I guess I've never really thought about it." "Come on," he pressed, smiling. "There has to be something. A dream, a goal, even something silly." I hesitated, then said, "I've always wanted to travel. To just pick a place on the map and go, no itinerary, no plan." "Where would you go?" he asked, his eyes lighting up with genuine interest. "Paris," I admitted, a little embarrassed. "I know it's cliché, but I've always wanted to see it." "That's not cliché," he said. "That's classic. Paris is amazing. You've been?" "Twice," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Once for work and once just for fun. You'd love it. The art, the food, the architecture, it's everything you'd imagine and more." I smiled, picturing myself wandering the cobblestone streets, sipping coffee at a sidewalk cafe. "Maybe one day." "Why not sooner?" he asked. "What's stopping you?" The question lingered in the air between us, and I didn't have an answer. The conversation stayed with me long after that night. What was stopping me? I'd always told myself there wasn't enough time or money, but the truth was, I'd been holding myself back. For years, I'd put everyone else first, Alex, my job, the idea of a perfect life, and in doing so, I'd forgotten how to dream for myself. I started making small changes. I set aside a portion of my paycheck each month for a Paris fund. I researched flights and hotels, jotting down notes in a journal. It felt empowering to have something to work toward, something that was entirely mine. Meanwhile, things with Elliot continued to evolve. One chilly evening, we found ourselves walking along the High Line, the city lights twinkling around us. He slipped his hand into mine, and though it caught me off guard, I didn't pull away. "I like this," he said softly. "Walking?" I teased, though my heart was racing. "Being with you," he said, his voice earnest. "You make everything feel lighter." His words settled over me like a warm blanket. I wanted to say something in return, to tell him how much he'd come to mean to me, but the fear of opening myself up again held me back. Instead, I squeezed his hand and said, "I like this too." One night, weeks later, Elliot invited me to his apartment for dinner. I hesitated before saying yes, unsure if I was ready for that kind of intimacy. But when I arrived, I found the gesture was less about romance and more about thoughtfulness. He'd cooked a simple meal, pasta with fresh basil and a bottle of my favorite wine, and we ate on the couch, laughing over old episodes of Friends. After dinner, he turned to me, his expression serious. "Anna, I need to say something." I set my glass down, bracing myself. "Okay. I don't want to rush you," he said, his voice steady. "But I care about you. A lot. And I want to be honest about that." I looked down at my hands, emotions swirling inside me. I care about you too, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. But I'm scared. I know, he said, reaching for my hand. I don't expect you to be all in right away. I just need you to know where I stand. His patience, his understanding, it was almost too much to bear. But it was also exactly what I needed. Thank you, I said, my eyes meeting his. For being, you. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of unspoken fears giving way to the warmth of something new. As I left his apartment that night, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Hope, fear, excitement, all tangled together. I wasn't sure where this was going, but for the first time in a long time, I was willing to find out. The weeks turned into a quiet rhythm of rediscovery. Between my new job, my growing connection with Elliot, and my ever-expanding Paris fund, I began to feel like a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. Lighter, freer. And though the scars from Alex's betrayal remained, they felt less raw. That was until one gray afternoon, when the past came knocking, literally. It was a Saturday, and I had just finished my pottery class when I came home to find Alex standing outside my apartment building. He looked nervous, shifting his weight from foot to foot, a paper bag in his hands. Alex, I said, stopping in my tracks. What are you doing here? I needed to see you, he said, his voice hesitant. Please, just a few minutes. I didn't want to let him in, but the pleading look in his eyes stopped me. With a sigh, I gestured for him to follow me up. Inside, I set my things down and crossed my arms, standing at a distance. What do you want, Alex? He set the bag on the counter and ran a hand through his hair, looking down. I've been thinking about everything. About us. About how I ruined it all. I stiffened. You did. His head shot up, the guilt in his eyes unmistakable. I know. I know I can't fix what I did, but I needed to say I'm sorry. Really, truly sorry. I crossed my arms tighter. Why now? I've been in therapy, he admitted, his voice trembling. I'm trying to figure out why I did what I did. Why I threw away the best thing I ever had. His words hung in the air, heavy with regret. But I couldn't let myself soften, not after everything. Alex, it's too late for apologies, I said, my voice firm. You made your choices. And I've moved on. I know, he said, nodding quickly. I'm not here to ask for another chance. I wanted you to have this. He pushed the bag toward me, and I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a small box. I pulled it out and opened it to find an intricate charm bracelet. Each charm was a small, delicate token, a tiny Eiffel Tower, a book, a heart. I had it made for you, he said quietly. Before everything happened. I was going to give it to you for your birthday. I stared at the bracelet, my emotions twisting into a knot. It was beautiful, thoughtful. But it was too late. Alex, I began, but he cut me off. I don't expect anything, he said, backing toward the door. I just wanted you to have it. To know that, even if I messed up, I did love you. I still do. And with that, he left, closing the door softly behind him. I sat on the couch, staring at the bracelet in my hands. For a long time, I didn't move. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to rid myself of the weight it carried. But another part of me, a quieter, softer part, recognized it for what it was, closure. The encounter with Alex lingered in my mind for days, but I didn't let it derail me. I had come too far to let the past pull me back. Instead, I channeled my energy into the future. One evening, as Elliot and I walked through the city after dinner, I told him about Paris. I'm going, I said, the decision finally solidified in my mind. His face lit up. That's amazing. When? I haven't booked it yet, I admitted, but soon. Maybe spring. He hesitated, then asked, do you want company? The question caught me off guard. You come with me? If you'll have me, he said, smiling. No pressure. But if you'd rather go alone, I get that too. I thought about it, weighing the idea. Paris had always been my dream, a personal escape. But now, the thought of sharing it with Elliot didn't feel like a compromise. It felt like an adventure. I'll think about it, I said, smiling back. That night, I booked my ticket. A one-way ticket to Paris in April. I didn't invite Elliot yet, I needed to take that first step alone. But I knew, deep down, that he'd be waiting when I was ready. The night before my departure, Vanessa threw me a small farewell dinner at her apartment. As we toasted with champagne, she pulled me aside. You're glowing, she said, grinning. I don't think I've ever seen you this happy. I feel free, I said, the realization washing over me. Like I'm finally living my life. And you deserve every second of it, she said, pulling me into a hug. The next morning, as I sat at the airport waiting for my flight, I thought about everything that had led me here. The heartbreak, the betrayal, the fear of starting over. It had been the hardest thing I'd ever faced, but it had also shown me a strength I didn't know I had. When the boarding call came, I took a deep breath and stood. This was it, the beginning of something new. I didn't know what Paris would bring, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to find out. The plane touched down in Paris just as the sun was beginning to set, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink. As I stepped out of the terminal and into the crisp spring air, it hit me, I was really here. The city of light. A place I had dreamed of for years. And now, for the first time, I was stepping into a chapter that belonged entirely to me. I took a taxi to my small hotel in the Marais, a charming building with wrought iron balconies and flower boxes spilling over with bright blooms. The streets were alive with energy, bustling cafes, the laughter of children, the soft hum of French conversation. I felt both exhilarated and nervous, like I was standing on the edge of something extraordinary. After checking in, I set down my bags and opened the window. The sound of the city wafted in, a mix of distant music, the clinking of glasses, the chatter of people enjoying their evening. I didn't feel the urge to plan or rush. I just wanted to take it all in. The next morning, I started my Parisian adventure with no agenda. I wandered the cobblestone streets, stopping to admire the intricate architecture, the scent of freshly baked bread wafting from boulangeries on every corner. I let myself get lost in the maze of alleyways, eventually finding my way to a small café near the Seine. I ordered a croissant and a café au lait, savoring every bite as I watched the world go by. Couples strolled hand in hand, street performers entertained children, and artists sketched on the banks of the river. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about Alex, or Becca, or what might have been. I was simply present. Later, I found myself at the Louvre, marveling at the grandeur of the glass pyramid and the masterpieces inside. I spent hours wandering the galleries, losing myself in the beauty and history of it all. Standing before the Mona Lisa, surrounded by strangers from all over the world, I felt a profound sense of connection, like I was part of something much bigger than myself. As the days passed, I fell into a rhythm. Mornings were for exploring, climbing the steps of Montmartre, browsing the stalls of Shakespeare and Company, wandering through the gardens of Versailles. Afternoons were spent sipping wine at sidewalk cafes or journaling by the river. Evenings were for indulgence, decadent dinners, the soft glow of streetlights, the magic of the Eiffel Tower sparkling against the night sky. It was everything I had dreamed of and more. But Paris wasn't just about escape. It was about rediscovery. I found pieces of myself I thought I'd lost: curiosity, joy, independence. I learned how to be alone without feeling lonely, how to savor the quiet moments, how to trust myself again. One evening, as I was walking along the Seine, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Elliot. "How's Paris? Missing you over here." I smiled, picturing him back in New York. I had sent him a few photos, of the Eiffel Tower, a picturesque bridge, the croissant I dubbed the best I'd ever had, and he had replied with enthusiasm every time. He never made me feel guilty for coming alone, never pushed for more than I was ready to give. I texted back, "Paris is magical. Wish you were here." His reply was instant, "Maybe next time. But for now, enjoy every second. You deserve it." I stared at the screen, warmth spreading through me. He was right, I did deserve this. And when I thought about the future, about the possibility of sharing moments like these with him someday, it didn't feel scary. It felt right. On my last night in Paris, I treated myself to dinner at a small bistro I'd stumbled upon earlier in the week. The waiter, a kind older man, brought me a glass of champagne, on the house, congratulating me when I told him it was my first visit to the city. To new beginnings, I whispered to myself, raising the glass in a silent toast. As I sipped the bubbly drink, I reflected on how far I'd come. The Anna who had arrived in Paris was not the same Anna who had discovered an earring on her couch months ago. That Anna was hurt, lost, unsure of her place in the world. This Anna, sitting in a Parisian bistro, surrounded by laughter and candlelight, was stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace whatever came next. When I returned to New York, I knew life would continue to have its challenges. But I also knew I could face them, that I was capable of rebuilding, of finding joy, of loving again. And as I boarded my flight the next morning, my heart full and my suitcase a little heavier with souvenirs, I knew one thing for sure: Paris wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning.